Hi everyone, today our guest is Professor Christopher Gerry. Hi Chris.
Hi Emin, nice to see you.
Chris, could you introduce yourself to our audience please?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm an economist by training. I'm now at the University of Oxford, where I'm the Director of Russian and East European Studies. I'm also the Dean of St Antony's College at Oxford and the Deputy Head of the Oxford School of Global and Area Studies. And I also hold an appointment in St Petersburg at the Higher School of Economics, where I'm affiliated with a Centre of Health Economics, Management and Policy.
Thank you, Chris, for coming to our show. I know that you have been busy with organizing seminar series on Azerbaijan together with Nizami Center at Oxford, and I was personally fascinated by the very deep and very focused discussions on various areas of social and economic development, of Azerbaijan, and this was called Beyond the Boom toward human and social development in the post-oil era in Azerbaijan. I would like to ask you, what could you say about this seminar series? What was your key takeaways, from these events, and how do you think does it impact now, like a research agenda for your university or other researchers and professors who have been listening to this series?
Yes, so firstly, it's been fantastic actually. It's been a really enjoyable and valuable experience for me. I should say, in working on the region Russia and Eurasia for 2 decades now, it's the first time I've come across a series devoted actually to any particular country other than Russia, really, and possibly 1 or 2 others. Azerbaijan tends to get covered from the perspective of international relations, of conflict, of oil economy, or whatever, and so I kind of learned a little bit about Azerbaijan over the years from those perspectives. What I hadn't really got a good grasp on was Azerbaijan as an emerging economy, as an emerging society, and so being able to focus in this series on social and economic development has been absolutely fascinating. And the other thing about this series is that rather than it being Western scholars pontificating from the international relations, global affairs perspective or oil economy perspective, it's been Azeris presenting from across the globe, mostly young emerging scholars as well, giving their perspectives, drawing on their expertise of the country. And it's provided for me and for the audience really profound insights into the country, into the challenges that the country is not just faces, but is facing, and in ways that I certainly didn't appreciate. As for research agendas, it's difficult for me to speak for other people who have tuned in from week to week. But certainly one of the things that has emerged from this so far, for me, I should say there's 2 weeks left, so still time to tune in for 2 more seminars. But one of the things that's emerged from this, from my perspective, is that it's been pretty clear that there's a kind of disconnect between Azerbaijan and the higher education or the research sector from within Azerbaijan, and certainly UK scholarship, but I think also other Western scholarship as well, in terms of collaboration. And in several of the seminars, I've asked the question of the speaker in exploring these possibilities or the awareness of such possibilities, and it's been relatively. It seems that it's relatively untapped or relatively unthought about, and that's true for many countries. But it's really struck me with Azerbaijan, and definitely going forward, I personally have already got ideas about how to involve speakers within this series, but also potentially people, contacts of people within this series, to involve them in some sort of international research collaboration going forward. Because what's clear is that there's much more to know and to work on from Azerbaijan perspective than perhaps we're able to appreciate, sitting here in Oxford.
Chris, why do you think, to my knowledge and also to knowledge of other Azerbaijani scholars who work in Azerbaijan or in US and Europe, it has been the first time that there has been such seminar series on Azerbaijan. We haven't seen anything. Maybe there were, but none of people I know who have been in research and in academic world for many years told me that they see it for the first time. Why is that? What do you think is the reason that we haven't seen so far something like this elsewhere?
It's a good question. I mean, there's several strands, I think, to the answer. One is that I think, to the extent that the former Soviet Union countries have had their own devoted seminar series, it's probably Russia, possibly Ukraine, possibly Georgia for different reasons have had a lot of attention. Other countries tend to get sort of grouped up into Central Asia, there you go, or South Caucasus, there you go, or Baltics, and thought of by outsiders like me as sort of one block that you can deal with it in one go. That would be one thing that I would say. And the other thing I think is that it goes back to this kind of disciplinary bias in a way as well. That the focus is typically an IR focus, IR or foreign relations type focus, global relations focus, and so there's relatively few devoted seminar series that look at social and economic development, even of the region as a whole, let alone individual countries within it. But for sure, to my knowledge, this is the first seminar series looking specifically at Azerbaijan. I have seen them on Georgia, as I said, and the particular reasons for that relating to funding relationships between Georgia and the UK in particular. But I think also, the other reason it relates to, if I sat here in Oxford without contacts with Azerbaijani scholars and tried to put together a series on Azerbaijan, it would look like a very lopsided series. Fortunately, through the contacts of the Oxford Nizami Ganjavi Centre, they've helped really shape this by drawing on the network of Azerbaijani scholars across the globe to bring together a really rich and diverse series. I couldn't have created that myself. I don't have the knowledge base of where those people are. So that may say something also about the hidden expertise maybe, or just the very widely distributed expertise on Azerbaijan and one or two other countries as well that would fit into this model of not having had their own devoted seminar series. But I just go back to what I said. The richness of what I've learned during the last 4 or 5 weeks is really it's unprecedented actually in a seminar series. I've enjoyed it like no other, I think.
So you are actually you're dealing with Russia, Eurasia, healthcare and research in this part of the world for about 20 years maybe. And since we were talking about Azerbaijan, maybe I will expand it, but it's also regarding Azerbaijan. So have you seen what kind of evolution of the region you have observed? What kind of evolution of research about the region you have observed, including on Azerbaijan? Because you mentioned that, you had now access, or through your networks, you could, suddenly find the quite wide network of Azerbaijani scholars who, work globally now. could you say that, and also about other countries, could you say that, you know, maybe 20 years ago that wasn't, like, there was no such network, and now within 20 years there are, like, not just in Azerbaijan but also maybe relevant for other, I'm not talking about now about Russia maybe, but also other smaller post-Soviet countries, they also had similar developments? That does it make access to information or the quality of research different? What could you tell us about the evolution of this region, and especially in terms of research about the region?
So I think, you know, the single biggest thing I would say, and this may just reflect also the natural sort of career progression of someone as they go from a young scholar like I was 20 odd years ago, and what am I now, a middle-aged scholar, let's say, 20 years later. But certainly, if I look back over those two decades of working on this region, the engagement with scholars from the region, particularly young scholars from the region, is just on a different level now, and it's one of the things that really, you know, keeps me interested in the region. It's something that, you know, I do a lot in Russia. I do a lot of mentoring of young scholars and trying to bring them into the international scholarly community. But you know, even 15 years ago, you know, I didn't have those connections, and I wasn't aware of those connections. I didn't see people in the, you know, on the international academic community, and I guess that reflects the changing nature of the education that's provided in the former Soviet Union countries. As I say, with, you know, I know Russia best in this respect, but the sort of evolution of the higher education system in Russia has, you know, it's transformed, at least at the top end, it's transformed during the last 2 decades. So it's now, you know, competitive with Western universities, with Western higher education systems. And so that enables that collaboration and cooperation to sort of ferment. And what that gives, what those partnerships, what those networks and so on give, is that they allow for, you know, access to data, access to information, access to you know, access to the capacity and the ins to do field work in the country, and so that makes the region more accessible for studying social and economic development, rather than pontificating about international relations and how countries are or aren't getting on with each other. And I don't think that was so possible, you know, previously. I got interested in the region in the 1990s, when there were stories of, you know, so-called the economics of transition and so on, and you know, chaotic stories and fascinating and, you know, almost romantic stories in a way for someone studying very dry economics degree, to think about how economics could play out in this field. And at that time, it was all about chaos and disruption and, you know, disaster in a way as well. But it was also about hope and about rebuilding and about and about social and economic prospects. And somewhere along the line, I think, you know, that, at least from my perspective, somewhere along the line, maybe in the 2000s, that got lost a little bit. Maybe it got lost in the easy period of the sort of boom of the early 2000s. And I think in recent years, perhaps since the 2008-9 crisis and one or two subsequent crises, depending which country we talk about, I think perhaps some of that's come back, where countries are having to think again about their development. It's not automatic because of, you know, a booming global economy, or because of, you know, high oil and energy prices and so on. So I think countries, you know, across the region, across the world, in fact, are thinking about how to use resources, how to develop society, how to keep society functioning, how to keep society happy, how to keep the economy growing. And those things are much more difficult now than when you know, money is aplenty, particularly in energy-rich countries such as Azerbaijan. And actually, that's the takeaway I get from this program. And it comes back to that, you know, hearing about what, you know, the discussions, the debates, the narratives around how to develop These are critical questions, and they're similar to ones we face in the UK and other countries. How do we run our health systems? What's the point of our higher education system? Who should be going through it? How should we intervene in labour markets? And all of these kinds of questions. They're developmental questions, but they're also just social and economic questions that are relevant to all countries. And I think we're starting to see that there's commonalities in the questions that we face, and that's certainly something I felt by listening to the talkers the speakers over the last 3 or 4 weeks.
I know that you have been researching the healthcare systems in Russia, but also I think comparatively in other post-Soviet countries. I don't know how much you researched the healthcare in Azerbaijan, but the global trends, and that Azerbaijan has reached now this post-oil era, which is coming, and there is more and more social pressure to reform, including I think the reforms in the healthcare system. What would you say about do you have any research or information about the state where the healthcare in Azerbaijan is? And, what would you have any kind of, let's put it this way, how do you think countries like Azerbaijan should approach the strategy of reforms in healthcare system?
I think, the one clear and striking message I would hold out here for Azerbaijan and other countries of the region is that the tradition of Soviet healthcare very much led to the separation, or perhaps the failure to unite, kind of the medical side of healthcare with the social side of healthcare. In nearly all so-called developed countries, these two things are very closely interwoven now, so that the social sciences are as much a part of public health as the medical sciences are. Health economics is huge in the UK, in the US, in Germany. There's no tradition at all of it across the region. And before this interview today, I was at an external exam board in Tashkent, where I've been asked to be an external examiner on a new program they have on public health. Public health science is called, an MSc program. And this is the first one of its kind in Uzbekistan, and I think the first one of its kind in the whole of Central Asia, that really brings together medical science and social science and the disciplines of public health to address health problems. Because in the end, public health problems, they're not about medical science. We know that from the recent pandemic. It doesn't strike all countries equally. It doesn't strike all people and groups of people within each country equally. These are the social determinants of health, that knowledge of which emerged in the 1960s and 70s in this country and other European countries. That side of understanding health, there's no tradition of that in the post-Soviet world, and it's very, very slow to take hold, really slow to take hold, and it makes collaboration between Western scholars and scholars from the region quite difficult in that field. I've set up a Centre for Health Economics in St. Petersburg. It's the only one of its nature in Russia, and I think the only other ones are really around management of healthcare resources, as opposed to the broader field of public health. And in Azerbaijan, to my knowledge, there's no such centre, there's no such scholarship, there's no programs in the education system that are producing the type of people that are now running or contributing to the running of health systems across the world. And that's going to take a long time to build up that, but it has to start. And so that would be, if I were to advise Azerbaijan on one thing, it would be to look at the education system and see where in your management programs, in bachelor's and master's programs, in your economics programs, in your other social science programs, see what kind of public health provision, course provision exists. And if it doesn't, start to build it. If it does, look at it and see how it relates to the medical science education that's being that's being delivered, because these two things have to come together to address public health challenges. It's beginning to happen. So I said there's this new MSc in Tashkent. There's the beginnings of things in Russia. There's very little in Ukraine. There's nothing else in Central Asia. And to my knowledge, there's very little in Georgia, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia either. So that's the challenge. It's a big challenge, actually. And it's not one that I think is widely understood across the region, actually.
Thank you, Chris. Chris, I have a question about, I know that you have also rich experience, not just in research, but also rich experience in administration of programs, at universities and currently at Oxford. And we touched upon this issue, why there is, very little presence of studies or events on Azerbaijan. But people who know the region, they know that if you take globally, there are so many universities, there are so many institutes of Armenian studies. There is very often collaboration with Georgian universities, or centers studying, Georgian language, Georgian culture, Georgian history. I wanted to ask you, we talked about the reasons why there is maybe very little presence of, interest towards Azerbaijan. But I would like now, since you are the person who are in this academic world, also from, administration part, from research part, so you know this world very well. What do you think, if Azerbaijan would have a strategy to expand or to help, to be studied more from abroad, how does it happen? Can Azerbaijan, like the government or maybe business community, wealthy individuals, or universities in Azerbaijan, how can they contribute to this? What should be, who should have a strategy about developing this? Or or you cannot actually do it from inside of Azerbaijan? Should this come, it only happens when, I don't know, Swedish university or American university or British university have specific interest in the country or in its history or culture or something else? How does it work? Is there a possibility for Azerbaijan to have a strategy to help to have centers, to build centers which would start then studying Azerbaijan and developing exchange of researchers, increasing the number of events about Azerbaijan? I have a friend, a scholar, and she told me once that, we are so far away from this, meaning Azerbaijan and the world's interest in Azerbaijan, when we talk about academic world, that she said, probably the most right way would be maybe start introducing some language courses at these different universities and then take it from there. I don't know. This is, not my area of expertise. But knowing how this world works, how do you think it would be possible to develop more research interest towards Azerbaijan? What could be or should be the strategy and how it could work?
It's a great question, a challenging question. So you said one way it can happen is by a Swedish foundation or a Swedish university or an American university being interested and initiating something. Actually, I think the better way for it to happen is from within Azerbaijan and out. And I would suggest, I think there's a kind of a multi-strand strategy. I'm not 100% sure that the language, beginning language courses, particularly in a scattergun approach, is necessarily the right way. So this year we piloted the Oxford Nizami Ganjavi Centre, piloted an Azerbaijan language course for the first time, which was, went pretty successfully, I think. And I hope that will then run again next year. I'll be encouraging the students from my department, which is a different department in the social sciences division. I'll be encouraging my students to think about enrolling on that course. And that is a way of stimulating interest, but that's in a context where there's already some latent interest, at least, and indeed in the case of the Nizami Centre, of course, absolute explicit interest and commitment to studying the region. But what I would say beyond language is partnership, actually, through thinking about how the higher education system can be leveraged to gradually, incrementally, small steps maybe, to create partnerships with scholars, perhaps in the first instance, with people who are interested in the region, people like me. I'm interested in Azerbaijan now. So to create partnerships, to try and work out whether there are ways in which students and young researchers in particular can be exchanged. There's a lot of understanding globally, I think, among the academic community, but not only among the academic community, of the value in young scholars or young professionals being allowed to, being facilitated to travel and to spend time working, studying, living. And I'm not just talking about Azerbaijan young scholars going out to the UK or wherever, but the other way around as well. I think there's a real appreciation of that, and as we learn that we need to try and understand more about the countries that we study, as well as improving ourselves in our disciplinary knowledge and languages and so on, that becomes more critical. So I think higher education is a good vehicle for it, because it's a vehicle without necessarily vested interests or hidden interests. It's it's a neutral ground from both perspectives, and it can lead to lasting and enduring creation of networks and opportunities. And through higher education, there are things like the Horizon Europe, which is the big European Union funding scheme. Azerbaijan can be included in that as a partner country, and that's one of the ideas that that I have coming from this seminar series. To have Azerbaijan as a country included, to engage with scholars from the region and who are originally from the region but maybe not there now, and that's that can happen just through these small connections. So higher education is for sure a vehicle. I think things like creating the seminar series, in normal times that's not so easy. Maybe this happened because of the pandemic, because it seemed it's plausible to bring together people from all over the world, but there's no reason why that can't continue to happen now that a webinar does have this valuable additional value added. But in normal times, how do you bring people together? There are costs involved. So if a couple of Azerbaijani scholars or advanced students or whatever wanted to come to London or Oxford or Paris or Bonn or wherever, somebody has to pay for that. Now there are European Union funding schemes which facilitate that to some extent. But for example, in Georgia's case, the reason we have quite a well-established Georgian program in Oxford is through the Shota Rustaveli Foundation, which has been keen in supporting this partnership and in facilitating visiting scholars from Georgia coming to Oxford. So until the pandemic, we hosted three visiting scholars a year, and tried to give them an Oxford experience and tried to mentor them and get them published in international journals with some success, I must say. But that was funded from the Georgian side. The UK higher education is not funded very well, I have to say. So the opportunities for doing that from the UK side are quite difficult. But that's an example of Georgia having a strategy and initiating something and finding finding like-minded people in this case in the UK, but they also actually do that with other countries. There's no reason why a science foundation from Azerbaijan shouldn't be thinking of doing the same sort of thing and creating those lasting networks.
This is great to hear that, if you think that Azerbaijan could be included in some programs that would fund, further research of Azerbaijani scholars at Oxford, if that would be one of the outcomes of the seminar series, I think it would be great. I wanted to ask you also this question. You said that, do I understand correctly that did pandemic actually helped us to have this seminar series on Azerbaijan? Because if there would be no pandemic, like it is quite organizationally, it's quite difficult and you need money and resources to organize, such series. But now this has been organized basically at €0 cost almost, right? I mean, there have been no flights, there have been, of course there's disadvantage to this, but then on the other hand, this complicated seminar, with people coming from different parts of the world, because these were Azerbaijani scholars, teaching, working, all over the world. So do you think pandemic helped or?
So I think, there's always what we call a silver lining of even the worst events. And I think that's, this series is a silver lining of the pandemic, because, maybe we wouldn't have thought about having this, because the first thought is, well, how can we get someone from the US or from Kuwait or Azerbaijan or wherever? And this, as you say, has been, carbon neutral and cost free.
Very green event.
A very green event, exactly, sustainable. But actually, thinking more seriously about it, I think this model of events is not a bad one for post-pandemic. Hopefully, touch wood, a post-pandemic world. But what I think would be great as a follow-up, maybe at some point in the next year or so, would be to actually have one in-person event, maybe for 2 or 3 days, where there's different activities, including workshopping ideas on collaboration, including talking to potential funders of partnerships that can make things can address your previous question about the getting an Azerbaijan footprint in the international scholarly community. So I think because those things you can't do so well online. Those important conversations you have over a cup of coffee or a beer or a glass of wine at the end of the day. Those sort of things where you form relationships and have ideas and so on. But this could provide the impetus maybe for something like that to happen.
So such seminar series, they could be followed up by further meetings, events, which could lead after personal also interactions to development of certain projects, collaboration of scientific nature, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, involving, these conversations don't just involve scholars, but also, administrators, funders, heads of department or whatever. How can we create a lasting collaboration? We've started something here, it seems to me. That's great. How can we keep that interest going? How can we develop not just an interest, but how can we develop a mutual expertise in understanding both Azerbaijan's social and economic development, but also the wider region.
Chris, I want to ask you maybe the last question, the question about money. So funding politics, of universities like Oxford, but also other, famous and big universities. It has been always interesting question to me. Like, on the one hand, you need to do the fundraising, right? So you have to approach, and probably many governments or foundations or individuals are approaching you or approaching such institutions. and you are, receiving, as, educational institution, money from them. But my question is, what is the balance between getting money from various actors who can fund, research projects, educational institution at large, some programs, and on the other hand, how you still keep your academic integrity, and how you make sure that those, interests or that money, doesn't influence the quality of research, its independence and objectivity.
So I should come clean here, actually, because my position in Oxford is actually funded by a donor, by someone in the US who had an interest in Russia and Eurasia and wanted Oxford to have a professor of political economy in Russia and Eurasia. And I've seen the contract that created my position through an endowment, a very large donation to the university. But beyond, what's very clear, beyond saying it's got to be on Russia and Eurasia, it's got to be economy, beyond saying that, everything else is arm's length. And that person has, no further, in this case, the person wanted to be anonymous anyway, but that person has no further influence doesn't have an influence over the appointment of the person, just the original specification, and then academic integrity takes over. Now that's slightly different to the kind of example that you were thinking of, but similar things apply on programs and partnerships and so on. Of course, if a foundation from overseas is giving a large donation to Oxford or some other university to create something, a Centre for Azerbaijani Studies, then of course they want to have some influence and so on in how that is shaped. And I think the distinction I would make is between the design of the project, the design of the centre, the things, the KPIs, if you like, the work packages that the centre will develop. The input can be at that stage. Okay, if you do this kind of study, if you allow for this and that, and the use of money in this way, that's fine. But then once the centre then begins, or once the project begins, or once the programme begins, then certainly in the UK, and I don't only speak for Oxford here, but across the UK, there would be a very, very clear then divide. Not to say not to be interested, not to be involved, but just not to think that there's going to be it's going to be easily influenceable going forward. And I've been involved, not actually at Oxford, at UCL when I was there. I was involved in discussions around a couple of potential investments from overseas foundations or donors that fell through precisely because there was a feeling that the person wanted, or the people, the foundation wanted too much influence over what was then going to be happening in a way that would bring into disrepute the academic integrity of the project.
Chris, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed the interview with you, and I hope that in 1 year or 2 years we would do follow-up interview to see that how this seminar series evolved, and maybe we will see each other in person.
That would be good, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. And do I hope that you and others involved in the creation of the series and the delivery of the series, I hope they keep pushing at the door and keep pushing, and let's collaborate. That's that would be my message. But thank you very much, and happy Independence Day.
Thank you very much, and happy Independence Day for Azerbaijan. Thank you.